Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and welcome back to the New Movie Diary. This is a cinema criticism series in which I review recent, new, and up and coming film releases and attempt to give you the straight facts about them, in my humble opinion. And because I don't have any children, I wasn't terribly inclined to check out the new Mario movie, and while I would have probably gone to see the drama if not for, well, the drama. Yeah, it turned out to be a good a night as any to take another sojourn into the Big Apple, the East Coast capital of independent and foreign cinema exhibition, and go for broke on one of several generationally inclined rural set dramas that just started their limited release rollouts this past weekend. Sure, I could have stopped into the film forum for Huang Meng's Living the Land, or popped over to the IFC Center for Georgy M. Unkovsky's DJ Ahmet, and while this is of course no judgment on either of those films, they're still high on my list of must-sees for this second quarter of the year, I'm happy to report that I was nonetheless quite satisfied to once again patronize the lovely Angelica Film Center for a screening of The Blue Trail, a Brazilian production by writer-director Gabriel Mascaro. The Blue Trail is itself something of a coming-of-age story, but just from the outset, it's certainly set apart from this crop of new foreign-release contemporaries in that it's a coming-of-age story focused on a heroine who is already 77 years of age, that being Teresa, a meat processing plant worker from a small post-industrial Amazonian town played by Denise Weinberg. The Blue Trail also sets itself apart in that while it is playing with both historical and generational themes, Mascaro's story takes on the form of a kind of speculative dystopian fiction. Basically, the framing device of the film is that a new near-future government in Brazil has imposed a new law that seeks to forcibly retire senior citizens older than 75 and have them sent to live in giant colonies as a mechanism of freeing up jobs for younger people. At least that's the propagandistic terms that this authoritarian regime goes by, stressing all the while with a smiling face and up-pitched voice how, no, this is a reflection of how much we revere your dedication and sacrifice to your country. Not content to go so quietly, Teresa becomes determined to live out one final desire to ride in an airplane, something she has never done in her entire life, having had to work 2 jobs to raise her now adult and decidedly not very empathetic or understanding daughter. But when she discovers that she is not able to buy a plane ticket because control of her finances have been automatically given over to her daughter, that's when Teresa decides to go on the lam, linking up with a shady riverboat hauler named Cadu, played by Rodrigo Santoro. Starting an adventure that will take this stubborn but, as we spend more time with her, quite emotionally complex old lady through encounters with rare snails that excrete a blue trail that has psychedelic properties. That blue trail of the title has layered meanings. It also refers, of course, to the Amazon River itself. There's also misadventures with shady snitches, gamblers, high roller clubs and casinos, a missionary who hawks e-reader tablets containing the Bible, and even more sensual and romantic awakenings that, even in the so-called prime of her life, she had never thought or dared to experience until, of course, the moment when she realized her small crumbs of independence and freedom were to be suddenly taken away from her in the name of a more prosperous economy. The Blue Trail is, if nothing else, a rare example of a truly unpredictable story, precisely because Mascaro's intuition in how he tells this story is all about not just blending various genres and narrative molds, the speculative dystopia, satirical absurdity, magical realism, the road movie, here more of a river movie, even eventually elements of queer romance. Not just blending these various elements, but in overtly transgressive ways. The Blue Trail inevitably deals with environmental themes, for instance, but it's notable that Mascaro doesn't seem particularly interested in centering those themes, in rendering The Blue Trail just another environmental or human interest piece for Western voyeurs set in some underdeveloped or chaotic rustic backwater. If anything, through that absurdist satirical framing, the portrayal of this always steady, even-keeled mild tone of this authoritarian regime, that sort of narrow perception of the substance of a film with this sort of subject in a setting like this is almost in itself conflated with a sense of dishonesty, a kind of masking of its own emotional, utilitarian view of poverty. That sort of sanctimony has no place in the Blue Trail. Rather, instead, Mascaro centers the emotional journey of Weinberg's heroine, and especially the emotional growth of this character who, while we meet her in media res, we get a very unique sense of how easy it is to turn the paradigm of the coming-of-age story on its head. Most coming-of-age stories invariably focus on young people, because we have this almost reflexive tendency to prioritize that kind of story, reifying the idea that it is when we are outgrowing our dependence on our parents, upon our older friend groups, on conventional authorities, that we are coming into ourselves as individuals. Whereas Mascaro's film renders rather obliquely how inevitably not only ageist, but especially sexist that paradigm is. For much like Teresa, many women, especially poor single women, the features of society preventing you from emotional growth, that kind of emancipation of yourself as your own person, as your own individual, in control of your own destiny, it's not that you're dependent, but rather the opposite. Women are more often expected, because of how frequently the dependency of others, whether partners or children, falls upon them, to give up their own growth, to subjugate in both domestic and social terms, both raising children and working and supporting them financially. Merely by centering an elderly woman as the heroine of her own emancipatory coming-of-age journey, Mascaro and Weinberg herself, through her never overstated but always piercingly observational performance of this character who increasingly has to take bigger and bigger chances to really carefully watch and judge and learn about the arbitrary rules of society around her. In the centering of that character, it's also put to us as an audience how often, even in the absence of the more routine coming-of-age story, we ourselves tend to take for granted that not only do the elderly not need nor should we expect emotional growth from them, but rather that we very often might be inclined to treat that desire to break free of expectations and try new things to be an inconvenience, to be incompatible with a world that places a lot of incentives in our way, especially financial, to brush them aside and clear the slate for the new generation who, because of their own ageist prejudices, fail to perceive how they might even be condemning themselves to a form of functional slavery like Teresa. That they too will one day be where she is in realizing that, in their hurry to say, yeah, get out of the way, old lady, let me start working here, let me make some money to support my family, they have no idea that basically they might one day be in their 70s looking around and realizing that they've never had the ability to truly live, to find themselves apart from every strata of obligation, from family to community to national politics. Though just absurd enough to be read as black comedy, The Blue Trail is exemplary of how you actually do satirical subject matter well, which is that you really challenge your audience with prejudices and preconceptions that they might have and carrying them to their logical extreme. Mascaro never gets into any details about whether or not this regime is right-wing or left-wing, whether this policy is neoliberal or communistic, because at its center is Mascaro's intuition that very many people going to see this movie, especially younger people, might very well say offhandedly, well, sure, yes, we as a society do owe it to our older generations. They shouldn't be working tirelessly well into their golden years. We should just be taking care of them. But not really anticipating the potentiality for the underlying implicit biases we have against not just the elderly alone, but specifically the elderly poor and elderly women especially. to be expressed through authoritarian means that end up denying our fundamental humanity and personhood more so than they do adequately ensure the ability of everyone to discover and learn who they are, to really give them a new lease on life and not just, retire them and say, all right, now we've got those dirty old poor women out of sight and out of mind. Back to business as usual, everybody, back to work. And I don't want to give the impression that I only got something out of the Blue Trail in terms of its concepts. I really do think that Mascaro and cinematographer Guillermo Garza achieve some amazing visual work here in ways that are careful to not be overly sensual when the subject is merely the Amazon as environment. The Amazon as the place people live, because again, it's consistent with the non-patronizing tenor of the movie. Mascaro and Garza don't portray the Amazon itself as some place of inherent mystical beauty. The Amazon is just a place where people live, and it is no more free of either the toxicities of industry or of an authoritarian state than any other congested metropole. Rather, the Blue Trail builds a sensuality through the journey of the characters, through their emancipation. The sensualism of the film's photography manifests through Teresa's coming into her own. And just as there are many aspects of the film, because it is a near-future speculative fiction, that have no basis in the reality of the Amazon, such as, massive riverboat casinos or glass-thin tablet Bibles, both figuratively and literally, the Amazon only becomes something mystical, becomes something inherently sensual and animistic because of Teresa's emancipation. The original score by Memo Guerra is also phenomenal. I really can't speak much more highly of the Blue Trail as not only a triumph of cinematic sensualism, but a triumph of the spirit behind it. This is not just a style over substance piece. This is a truly original sci-fi drama that I'm going to be giving an enthusiastic 4 out of 5. Don't skip out on it if you see it coming to a theater close to you. With that, I'm getting out of here. Thank you so much for sticking through this whole video, and please don't be a stranger to shouting out in the comments, what did I get right, what did I get wrong? Otherwise, please share, like, subscribe, bell, yada yada. My name is Ian Garcia. This is Devotional Criticism, and this was the New Movie Diary. I'm going to catch you guys next time.